So each of the last 4 Sundays, we've went through the Power Four conferences, the head coaches, the hot seat meter. And today we're going to wrap up with the Big 12. And it's somewhat surprising to me that for a conference that I think is almost like its brand is built on some volatility, explosive, you never know what you're going to see type of football, that there are some really, really, really secure coaches in the Big 12. And not just because they're about to enter their first year or whatever the case may be, or they're early in their tenure. They're just some well-established coaches who I think don't even have to worry about having one really bad season affecting their position on the hot seat meter. It's borderline impressive. For instance, there are now 16 teams in the Big 12, college football math, and I've got 8 of them in the freezing category. Now, guys like Brent Brennan, Willie Fritz, and somewhat Kenny Dillingham as either going into their first year or are early in their tenures. Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State is going to have a pretty long leash because of what he inherited when he took over that program. Herm Edwards, baffling hire to begin with, then puts Arizona State in a spot where they're breaking like big time NCAA violations during COVID, is going to get Kenny Dillingham a pretty long leash. And so it doesn't matter how bad the first year went or whatever the case may be. He's not in any danger. Brent Brennan and Willie Fritz, going into their first seasons, they wouldn't have hired him. If I could maybe almost argue that Brent Brennan could be in the cold category instead of the freezing category, because he got hired kind of late in the game when, it's a little at the end of the music was stopping on the coaching carousel. And then Jed Fish leaves because Nick Saban left Alabama. Caleb DeBoer goes to Washington. Jed Fish goes from Arizona to Washington. Brent Brennan goes from Arizona or San Jose State to Arizona. You could maybe put him in the cold category because he might not have been their top choice had things worked out differently. But when push comes to shove, I don't know how you put him anywhere else. Lance Leipold at Kansas has done a spectacular, fantastic, unbelievable job. It is one of the more difficult jobs in Power 4 college football, and he has been nothing but excellent in that position. Kalani Sitake at BYU is one of their own. Has done a really good job. Has won a lot of games for BYU. Now, I know that, maybe the Big 12 is a little bit different than the independent schedule that they were playing. And I think Kalani Sitake is going to adjust to that. They go 5-7 in their first season after winning 11 games in 2020, 10 games in 2021, 8 games in 2022. 5-7 is a step backwards, but he is one of their guys. So I think he doesn't have anything to worry about. Sonny Dykes at TCU had the Horned Frogs in the national championship game a year and a half ago. Doesn't matter what 2023 looked like. You took them to the 2022 national championship game. You don't have to worry about anything. Deion Sanders at Colorado has done nothing but expose people to the Colorado brand and bring attention and notoriety. Doesn't matter if they went 4-8. Doesn't matter if they were the most hyped college football team of all time in September of last year and then flailed down the stretch. Deion Sanders brought attention, notoriety, and big-time recruits to Colorado, a place that hadn't had it, any of it, in a really, really, really long time. And then finally, Kyle Whittingham. I don't know that there is a more secure coach in America than Kyle Whittingham. What he has done with the Utes is, we spent the last couple of weeks talking about the College Football Hall of Fame. Kyle Whittingham is a 1,000% College Football Hall of Famer for what he has done at Utah for decades now. It is nothing more than incredibly, incredibly important. So that's a look at the freezing category for the Big 12. There are half the coaches in the conference that I don't think have anything to worry about, no matter how bad 2024 goes. And that, I think, was a pretty good spot to be in. There's a couple more in the cold category. I got Matt Campbell at Iowa State, and I want to spend some time talking about this because Matt Campbell, I think, is one of the more misunderstood coaches in college football. Because when you think about the, I don't know if the expectations at Iowa State are understood by enough people. Because if you think about Iowa State football all time, it is less than good. Iowa State has not won a conference championship since 1912. World War I hadn't happened yet. Like, I think World War I hadn't happened yet. Sliced bread was not invented the last time Iowa State won a conference championship in football. Sit there and think about that for a second. Sliced bread was not invented when Iowa State won a national, not even won a national championship, won a conference championship the last time. Now, undeniably, the expectations for Iowa State under Matt Campbell have been really big. They have grown. And have they maybe met the expectations, or have they exceeded expectations under Matt Campbell? I would say no. And I think he might be the first one to tell you that, because it felt like year after year after year, it was like, this is the year that Iowa State is going to be really, really good. That this is the year. And they played in a New Year's Six Bowl. They went to the Fiesta Bowl in 2020. They went 9-3. And they went to the Big 12 championship game. But they haven't been the 10-2, 11-1 college football playoff challenger with a 12-team expansion that we have seen or expected. And since the Fiesta Bowl in 2020, they went 7-6, 4-8, and 7-6. So they have not reached the expectations that you might have expected. Now, the flip side of that is, like, those expectations exist because of Matt Campbell, because of the standard that he has built, the level of recruiting that they have reached in his tenure. And so I don't think that can be used as a downside against you. Like, the reason people expect greatness from you is because of me, and you're going to think that I'm the problem? No, that's not it. Iowa State is a difficult place to win. You have virtually no recruiting base. You know, coaches will tell you draw a 5-hour circle around where you are, and that's where your recruiting base lives. Do you know what a 5-hour circle of Ames, Iowa is? Nothing. It's nothing. And so you got to get kids from Texas and California and Florida and JUCO kids to come to Iowa State, and you're recruiting the second and third tier kids from those states rather than the top tier kids from Iowa and Western Illinois and Kansas, Nebraska, Southern Minnesota. It's not great. It's just not. That's not a recruiting hotbed by any stretch of the imagination. It's a tough job, evidenced by the fact they haven't won a conference championship in more than 100 years. So I cut the guy a little bit of slack. And I think when you put in the expectations of Iowa State, I don't know that you can argue anything other than I borderline would say that he is on the freezing category, because I think he is very, very secure there. I don't think he has to worry about a whole lot going into 2024. I don't think that he has to be bothered by any stretch of the imagination of what happens. Now, if they go 3-9 or something, he might move from cold to neutral. He still doesn't really have a whole lot to worry about when you factor in the expectations at Iowa State. At Kansas State, I have Chris Kleiman. I think he's in the cold category. They won 10 games in 2022. They won 9 games in 2023. And there are people that believe they are the favorite to win the Big 12 in 2024, that they are staring down a college football playoff berth in 2024. I don't know. I haven't thought that far out yet of like what the college football playoff looks like, at least from the Big 12's perspective. I don't know how I feel about it, but if there are prominent people in college football that believe this guy in this program are poised to make the college football playoff, I think you have to pay attention to that. And I also think that the only reason he is in the cold category is in the freezing instead of the freezing category is I would imagine that Kansas State fans probably recognize it, like, hey, this guy might be start to be coveted by some big time programs. And Like when I was younger, I remember like I would save vacation days from my full-time job because my thought was like, at some point, my grandma and grandpa are going to die. And I'm going to need more than the bereavement time to deal with that. And so, like, you already start to mentally prepare for that. And I think Kansas State fans might be mentally preparing for someday Chris Kleiman is going to leave them for a bigger and better job. It's going to pay him a bunch of money that he's going to be really successful at. And you start to kind of just hedge your bet a little bit. Like, you know what? He's pretty good. I don't know if he's great. I don't know if he's so secure that if we go 0-12, he's going to keep his job. That's why I got him in the cold category instead of the freezing category. Now, in the neutral, because that so far we've done 10 of the 16 coaches in the Big 12. In the neutral category, I have 4 coaches. Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati, I think you might be able to argue, might already be in the warm category, but I put him in the neutral strictly because of what Cincinnati accomplished under Luke Fickell, and then what Scott Satterfield accomplished at Louisville and at Cincinnati. Cincinnati viewed hiring Scott Satterfield as like a win. Like, we got kind of won over on our rival, right? Like, Cincinnati Louisville is not the chief rivalry for either of those schools, but it is kind of viewed as a win. Like, hey, we got one over on our rival. And he goes 3-9 in his first season. Now, there's a lot that goes into that first season. It's a first season at a new conference, first season under a new head coach. You're doing things differently than the old guy. But the old guy is the only guy who got his team from a non-Power 5 conference into the 14 college football playoff. Cincinnati was as good of a program as damn near anybody in the nation under Luke Fickell. And in year one, Scott Satterfield goes 3-9. So I think there's already maybe a bit of like, oh crap. Did we get this wrong? Because I saw what we could be under a really, really, really good head coach. And so I think 2024 is a big year. If they can show marked improvement, if they can go 6-6, they go 7-5, basically Cincinnati can get to a bowl game in 2024. I think Scott Satterfield probably gets that ship righted. They get things moving in the right direction. They don't have to worry about a whole lot. If they go at 3-9 again, I think Scott Satterfield enters 2025 with like the on fire category. Now, Cincinnati's non-conference schedule is not, it's Towson, Pitt, and at Miami of Ohio. They should be 3-0 conceivably. They play Arizona State, UCF, Colorado. You probably should think, as a Cincinnati fan, we can make a bowl game in 2024. But if you don't, I think Scott Satterfield goes into year 3 in the warm category. If it's not significantly better than 2023, I think it's the on fire. So I put him in the neutral after one season, which is probably not a great place to be for the future of your program. Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, I put in the neutral. You could probably, there were some people would argue he's in the freezing category. Some people would argue he's in the cold category. The reason I put him in the neutral category is because while he's an Oklahoma State guy, while he's been there for a really long time, he has made really no bones about the idea that he has openly flirted with other jobs. Like, he has, and I don't know how much of that is like, I'm doing this to get a bigger contract. I'm doing this to make people understand and appreciate me. I don't know what his motivation is to do that, but he has not been shy about interviewing for, flirting with, and borderline almost accepting other jobs. Now, he's been the head coach at Oklahoma State since 2005, which was the last time they didn't go to a bowl game. He has had a winning record from 2006 on. He's won more than 10 games 8 times. So, and somewhat going back to the same thing that we talked about with Iowa State, in that the expectations at Oklahoma State are what? You can win 8 games there every year. It's probably going to be good enough. And yet, like, there's a somewhat growing faction of that fan base is like, we should be better. You could argue Oklahoma State should have played in the national championship game in, what was that, 2012? 2011. They went 12-1 and ended up going to the Fiesta Bowl. Alabama destroys Notre Dame in the national championship game that year. You could argue, and I think you probably should argue, that that they deserved that spot over Alabama that season. But that's neither here nor there. Mike Gundy has won 10 games 8 or more times. And so there's starting to be somewhat of a like, well, hey, wait a second. Should we be able to get over the hump? I mean, they've played in the Cotton Bowl. They played in the Sugar Bowl. They've played in Fiesta Bowl. They've done everything except make the college football playoff, make the national championship game. And there's some people that are like, why have we got there but not gotten over the hump? Is it Mike Gundy? And my response to that would be like, no, it's not. He is pulling you to new heights. But I think there's just like, once you've been somewhere for damn near 20 years, there starts to be some questions about whether you've underachieved because you haven't gotten. I don't think they have. But you couple the fact that you've been the same place, you've never gotten to the heights that you've seen your neighbors, Oklahoma and Texas and other teams get to, and then you openly flirting with other jobs, I don't think it's real hard to say that like Mike Gundy might be in the neutral category, at least from my perspective. Joey Maguire from Texas Tech got off to a hot start. Texas Tech had big aspirations last year, and because there were people that were talking about like Texas Tech maybe should be the team to beat in the Big 12, like that they could win 10 games, that they could be a fringe college football playoff contender last year. And they went 7-6. He went 8-5 in his first year, 7-6 in his second year. And so I think 2024 is a like, okay, what are we? Are we getting better? Are we going to be a 9-4 team? Are we going to be a 9-3 team? Are we going to be a 5-7 team? What are we under Joey Maguire? And the answer to that, I think, is going to be borne out in 2024, especially with a somewhat revamped Big 12 that you don't have Texas and Oklahoma to worry about in conference play. Like, you don't have to say, like, well, I wonder what's going to happen when, we got 2 guaranteed losses or whatever. You throw in the bad non-conference schedule of Abilene Christian, Washington State, and North Texas. And the most difficult games on the schedule are at Arizona, at Oklahoma State. You might go into 2024 with the same kind of aspirations of like, can Texas Tech win 9 games? Can they be a top 25 program in 2024? And if you're not, you start to question, well, why aren't we? Why weren't we where we thought we could be? And all too often it ends up with like, well, maybe the head coach is the problem. And then Gus Malzahn at UCF is in a somewhat similar boat where you had a good, and we're going to talk about this at some point here in the next couple of weeks of like, what does it look like when you move from either one Power 5 conference to another, or if you go from a non-Power 5 conference to a Power 5 conference. In their last 2 years in the American, they go 9-4, 9-5, winning, share a division title in 2022. In 2023, they go 6-7. And so part of that is just like you're bumping up in stature in competition. So you win 9 games in your first 2 years at UCF. You win 6 in your first year at the Big 12. I think there needs to be some adjustment time to the Big 12 for Scott Satterfield and Gus Malzahn and Kalani Sitake. Like guys, coaches and programs that are moving from the quote unquote lower ranks to the Big 12, I think deserve some wiggle room. At the same time, it's a business. You got to produce. And so I think 2024, like a lot of these other coaches, is an important year for Gus Malzahn. Again, if they can go 7-5, if they can go 8-4 before a bowl game and get into a bowl game, I don't think Gus Malzahn has a whole lot to worry about. They pull up a 3-9. 2025 is when we do this a year from now. It's probably not going to be great. for Gus Malzahn. So Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati, Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, Joey Maguire at Texas Tech, Gus Malzahn at UCF are the coaches that I have from the Big 12 in the neutral category. I don't have anybody on fire in the Big 12, and maybe I'm wrong on that. And I think the one that I could be most wrong on that is Dave Aranda at Baylor, because what he had Baylor at its height, and it's sort of like the same thing that I will argue about. Like if you talk about, when you get like a first round quarterback and they have this brilliant game, throw for 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, complete 80% of the passes. You're like, oh my gosh, this guy is the future. And then he never hits that again. But at the same time, you're like, I've seen it. I've seen what that greatness can look like. He's flashed it. All we've got to do is get him to be more consistent. And I feel like that's what Baylor is under Dave Aranda. You've seen in 2021, they were 12-2, and they won the Sugar Bowl, and they won the Big 12. And they've been 6-7 and 3-9 since then. And they were 2-7 in his first season. And I think after going 12-2 in 2021, finishing in the AP top 5, people thought like this Baylor is going to be a power under Dave Aranda, and they have not been that since then. And so I wonder, you go 6-7, 3-9 in back-to-back years. 2024, pivotal year. There's no Texas and Oklahoma. There's no 2,000-pound gorillas in the conference anymore that are going to win the conference 9 times out of 10. It is as wide open of a Power 4 conference as can be imagined. Because when you look at the Big Ten, you look at the ACC, you look at the SEC, you have a good idea which 3 to 4 teams are going to win the conference damn near every year. And in the Big 12, that is who? Oklahoma State, Kansas State, BYU. I think Baylor can and should be in that conversation under Dave Aranda. But when you're coming off 6-7 and 3-9, you cannot afford to have a bad 2024. So I've got Dave Aranda on the warm seat. I think you could probably argue he might be on the hot seat, might be on fire. But I can't put him there yet because I've seen what Baylor has been and can be under him, and you hope that you can recapture that. Now, with Neil Brown at West Virginia, they have been, when Neil Brown got hired at West Virginia, I was like, oh, man, that's a slam dunk. He's coming over from Troy. They're wide open offenses, which like West Virginia is going to want to play. And you just thought like, okay, this is the connection that's going to put them over the top and make them a constant Big 12 contender. And it hasn't been that yet. They're 31-29 under Neil Brown. They've got one winning season, which was last year, 9-4. But 2023 was the like kind of save Neil Brown's job tour, because when you go 5-7, 6-4, 6-7, 5-7, you got to have a pretty nice season to keep your job. He's had 5 years now, and you got to 9 wins last year, which is really nice. But if you don't build on that, if you take a step backwards, it's going to go back to like was 2023 a flash in the pan, and under this guy, we're going to be a 6-7, 5-7 team every year? Because that's not what we're after. That's not what we're looking for. So 2024, while it's like for half the conference, doesn't have anything to worry about, there are a couple of coaches that it can go either way, and a couple of coaches that are like, you need to have another nice season. I don't know if they go 4-8 and Neil Brown gets fired. But if they go 4-8, Neil Brown's going to be the on-fire candidate alongside Dave Aranda if things don't go smashingly for West Virginia in 2024. So that's a look at the Big 12 hot seat meter. Want to know what you think? Let us know if we've got completely wildly off base reads on things. I don't think so, but if you do, let me know in the comments down below. We'll have that conversation. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. You're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all that great college football content we're pumping out. If you want to listen on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. See you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.